Welcome, viewers, to another episode of It Depends podcast. This one is going to be very interesting. It promises to be a masterclass on the topic of data ops. Data ops is this interesting space where we are producing data products more efficiently and faster. It's a way by which data and analytics is being transformed from being a science to an art, in my opinion. But then it's also very mysterious, like what exactly is data ops that we talk about? So to learn more about data ops, we turn to a company that is also called DataOps. To be precise, DataOps.live. I am honored to be joined by my very good friend, Guy Adams. He is a co-founder of DataOps.live. He joins us today from London. So, Guy, thank you so much for coming to this show. Really appreciate your time.
Having me. Great
That's
to be
good.
here.
Yeah, so Guy, we also wanted to have Justin Mullen, the other co-founder, on it, but he couldn't make it. But we're gonna go deep. Guy is actually what is the term? Dyed in the wool, technical guy. He loves to.
Yep. Technical and proud.
Yes, he is. In fact, he comes from software engineering discipline, which is very unique for some of us who are born and bred in the data space. So what I'm going to do is, instead of stealing any thunder from you, Guy, please, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Rajiv. So yeah, my Guy Adams, CTO at DataOps.live and co-founder. As you said, my background is 20 years in the software engineering space. I've taken many organizations on the Agile, DevOps, CI/CD journey and seen the values of it. And about a little over 5 years ago, I became one of the first Snowflake customers in Europe. Got absolutely hooked by what was all of a sudden possible in the data and analytics space, and that was enough for me to decide to jump ship, move industries, if you like, into the data industry. And I joined a small SI company in London called Datalytics as their CTO.
That's right. And so what happened to Datalytics? I'm just curious. Is it still around?
So we developed the original concepts behind DataOps. We developed inside Datalytics. So in fact, I went from being responsible for a team of software engineers to a team of data engineers, and really a lot of the early genesis of DataOps and the principles behind it and the true DataOps philosophy came from the fact that I got so much experience of running these highly efficient software engineering teams. And I inherited this data engineering team, and they were amazing people, incredibly smart, top of their field, but the productivity was terrible, really terrible, objectively very terrible. And I spent a lot of time, first of all, measuring it, and I worked out that something like my data engineers were something like 70% less efficient than the software engineers I just left.
Wow.
I mean, big numbers. When you're talking about people and salaries, and you're talking about a team of 50 people, 50 people at 70% less efficient is enormous numbers. And then I spent a lot of time trying to understand, well, why is this? And that really started our journey into DataOps was saying, okay, well, what is missing here? What do the data teams not have, these data engineers not have, that their software counterparts do have?
Mm-hmm.
And really, a lot of it came down to the practices of agility, but then agility underpinned by DevOps. What is it that DevOps gives a software engineer? The ability to spin up an environment with a couple of mouse clicks in a few seconds, the ability to get a completely dedicated sandbox environment for developing anything from a brand new feature from scratch all the way to fixing a typo. But the ability to work, the ability to move at speed, to move at pace, not have to worry about anybody breaking your things, not have to worry about you breaking anybody else's things, certainly not have to worry about hitting anything in production. And really the biggest light bulb for me came when I was working with a lot of sort of, project plans with big organizations and big customers, and people would say things like, hey, we've got to put a month in the project plan to build a QA environment. And that was a big red flag for me, because I'm used to, when I want to build a QA environment, I press a button and I wait 30 seconds, a minute, maybe long enough to make a cup of coffee, and I've got a completely clean, perfectly built QA environment every single time. The fact that this was taking a month and it was a manual process was really the sign that something was fundamentally missing. And that fundamental thing was DataOps, both the principles, the practices, but also then the underlying and underpinning technologies.
So we will dig deeper into DataOps in just a few minutes, but I'm trying to to connect the dots here. So you were in data analytics, you recognized that there was this gap and how poor the efficiency was. So you ended up building some of these things in the field to help deliver
Yeah,
fast.
so we initially the very first evolutions of the very first sort of genesis of DataOps was not a product we were planning to sell. It was a product that we were building, or a set of capabilities we were building internally to make our own teams more efficient. I wanted to make my delivery teams dramatically more efficient. So so we could be more profitable and compete on cost. I wanted to make them more repeatable. I wanted to make them more automated. I wanted to make the solutions they were building easier to support. I wanted standardization. I wanted better governance because we were working with, big blue chip companies that were demanding this. So originally we built it to enable our own professional services and data engineering teams. And then it got to the point where we said, we were doing a lot of industry speaking. And I was hearing a lot about, well, where do I get this? Where do I get this? And the answer was, well, sorry, you can't have it. I mean, we just use it for our own customers, but you only have to hear that so often to think, what, there's an opportunity here. This is not, our need is not unique. Our need is shared by every SI in the world who's trying to do the same thing, but much more important, every customer data engineering team, data engineering department, who are trying to do the same things.
It is so interesting. I'm listening to your story, and it reminds me of DBT. This is DBT's story too. They built stuff to make their own internal processes faster. And then people said, wow, this is a great product. Why don't you go to market with it? And from what I understand is that data analytics team, the founders came to San Francisco Bay Area to talk to investors, and investors said, there's a product waiting to be commercial. And hence, you guys split off, and then DataOps came into existence, and here we are. So amazing story. Just curious, what is your North Star?
So I think my ultimate goal, where I want to be in 3 years' time, say 4 years' time, is complete parity with DevOps. And when I talk about parity, I talk about both a technical maturity, so the same capabilities, but also adoption and understanding. You could not go out and find a software development team worth anything anywhere in the world that says well, yeah, we don't operate, we don't do DevOps, we don't do automation, we don't use Git, we don't use Git workflows. It's not a question. It's just it's like it will be like saying, well, do you need a laptop or not? It's like just not a question. It's just everybody assumes it. It's a in the software world, it's a discussion that's been had. Everybody's worked out optimal, and now everybody's using it. In the data world, that's not the case. Certainly 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, we were having to talk to people about, well, what is DataOps? What does it mean? What are the benefits of it? The industry has moved on very significantly then. From then, most people are aware of it. Most people sort of know what it is. Most people have a reasonable idea of sort of the value that they should get from it. But adoption is still very low. Actual real world adoption is still very low. And certainly getting to the point where it's not a question anymore, it's simply the way that data is always done, is still a way off. So yeah, my North Star would be that DataOps reaches parity in terms of technical maturity, but also in terms of understanding industrial maturity and adoption.
I love this succinct North Star you have. It's just so simple. If, let's say, DevOps was 10 on a scale, where would DataOps be at this point?
I'm going to say when we first started, it was a 0.1. I would say today it's probably a 6. And the interesting thing is, I actually spend a lot of time looking at the industry as a whole. And what's really interesting is you can track the maturity of a discipline based on key milestones. When was the first book written? When was the first conference about it? When did the revenue for that industry hit a certain amount? And you can plot these milestones, and you can plot them for DevOps, which is obviously the most mature and has reached the 10. Then you can plot them for Cloud Ops, which came along a little bit later. And what you know is it started at 0. But it's got to a 9 or a 10 now as well, but it got there much faster. And why did it get there faster? Because it wasn't having to solve everything new for the first time. It was looking at what DevOps had done, and then it was adapting that to its own purposes. So it got to 10 much faster. Now I plot DataOps on that same curve, and we're hitting those same milestones faster again. So what we will see is, these 3 curves that start, a decade plus apart, we're at zeros, are now converging and converging and converging. And I would say, yeah, in probably 2 years' time, I think DataOps will be at a 9, 9.5, close to a 10.
Wow. So we're getting there very fast, which
Yep.
begs the question, what is DataOps?
It's I would describe it as a set of first of all, it's not purely technology. It's described as socio-technical. So it's a set of principles and a set of practices and a set of supporting technologies. It's those three things together that manages the complete cycle from pre-development. So it even steps into like, well, what does requirements gathering mean, and how concrete the requirements do you need before you start work? How much upfront design work should you do? So it manages everything from pre-development all the way through the development process, the testing process, the validation process, the peer review process, getting that change into production, because that's where the business value occurs. Nobody gets paid, nobody gets no business benefits from lines of code, lines of configuration, whatever. It only ever means anything when it actually hits production, when it hits live. So DataOps, in the same way as DevOps and clouds before it, is about optimizing and minimizing the time from I know I need X to X is live and delivering value. But it doesn't stop there. A lot of people think, hey, great, it's live, I can move on to the next thing. A massive part of, and if you look at the DevOps or the DataOps figure of 8, it's a loop. It feeds back, and the reason it feeds back is that just deploying to production is not the end of the process. What you should be doing, particularly when we talk about this in the context of data products, is say, hey, I just made a change to my data product. Great. Did it do what I want it to do? Is it delivering the initial value? Is it achieving what I wanted it to achieve? So there's that monitoring and validation process to say, hey, if I built something and released it, are people using it? If they're using it, is it delivering the value I expect? If not, what can I do about it? So it doesn't just end at deployment and a successful deployment. It also encompasses that observation, that observability, and that feedback loop to make sure that the changes are doing what we want them to do. And if not, then we make an incremental change and we go through all of the same process again, and we deploy that, and we get feedback, and so on. And that's where the figure 8 comes from. It's the development part, and then the observation part, and the development part, and the observation part.
This is so interesting because when I think DevOps, DataOps, I think development and operations, like deployment, but you're saying it's even before that. So I'm used to writing a PRD, a product requirements document. Would that also fall under DataOps?
I would say certainly from a principles perspective, absolutely. The concept of saying, this is where we start to muddy terms slightly. Where does Agile stop and DevOps start? Where does Agile stop and DataOps start? There are some muddy boundaries there, but ultimately they're not. I don't think they are things that we really have to pick apart necessarily. They go hand in hand. One enables the other. Very few organizations are in a position where they say, I want to spend 3 months writing a document and arguing about it and debating it, and then 6 months building it, and then 3 months trying to deploy it, only to find out that actually wasn't what I wanted at all, and go back. So in order to break that cycle, I move to an agile approach where I say, hey, let me come up with enough of a starting point. Let me come up with a concept. Let me do just enough architecture and design, and then let me build something for a week, 2 weeks. And then let me see how that thing is working, and whether it turns out to be a bit of what I needed. And if so, I'll improve upon it, or I'll course correct, and I'll improve on that, and I'll iterate, and I'll iterate, and I'll iterate, and I'll iterate. And so that agile principle is something that universally everybody is looking for. But you don't get that agile principle if your development process is, book some time on the dev system, get a couple of hours of work in an afternoon, end up with your code broken, then spend a month testing it. You can't get that agility if your development process is monolithic, is waterfall. So that the agility at the business level fundamentally depends on this automation, this repeatability, this very rapid development process, this very high governance and low risk at the development level and the deployment level.
So let's take it to the next level. So you've explained really well the figure 8 and some of the things in that. If we were to break down the space of data ops into discrete components or building blocks, what would those be?
So I would say I would describe them in almost in the lineage for us, where we started. So we started at the operate piece. And the operate piece was basically, how do I get things out there? That's the piece that's about deploying to the world, whether it's deploying to my dev environment, my QA environment, my production environment, my feature environment. But we started out very much focusing on the, how do I press a button and have everything deployed, updated? So
deployment is one of the components.
Yeah, so automated deployment, infrastructure as code, the orchestration of all the pieces, that all comes under the bucket that I would call operate. Then the second piece we've got, which kind of came subsequent to that, is the development piece. You need the operate piece first, but once you've got that, that's about deploying changes. How do I make those changes quickly? How do I make those changes efficiently? How do I make those changes knowing they're well tested? How do I iterate when I'm in a development cycle? How do I make a change and see the results in 2 or 3 seconds, not 2 or 3 minutes or 2 or 3 hours? So, the first block is the operate piece. The second block is the develop piece. How do I develop this incredibly efficiently? The third block that came after that was the observe piece, as I talked about before. Again, it's no good developing very efficiently and developing fast and deploying it effectively. If I've got no idea what the results of that are, then I don't know what to feed back into my next efficient development cycle and deployment cycle. So those are kind of the pieces that historically we've been working on. And then more recently, the areas that we've been focusing on are create. And by create, we're really talking about reducing the technical barrier. One of the biggest shifts that we've seen in DataOps, just in the time we've been doing it, is when we first started out, DataOps was something that central data engineering teams wanted. 10 data engineers, 20 data engineers, 30 data engineers, all reporting to the same line manager, doing data engineering, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. As many organizations, particularly bigger organizations, have started to decentralize, whether you call it data mesh or something different, the principles are still the same. It's saying, I want to, and it goes very much hand in hand with the data product approach. I want to devolve responsibility for maintaining these data products to the teams that actually understand the data, not keep them locked up centrally in some data engineering team. There's a number of implications that come with that. One is, well, I've got requirements for centralized governance and infrastructure management, but I also want to delegate responsibility to departmental teams. How does that work? So that's one of the problems that we solved. But the other one was, all of a sudden, we've now got people who want to build data products, iterate on data products, deploy data product to production, who aren't data engineers. They haven't done data engineering for the last decade. They might know a bit of SQL. They might be able to modify configuration files, but they're not hardcore engineers. So one of the big things we've been focusing on is reducing that technical barrier to being an effective data product engineer or a data product developer, to the sort of person that can be a business analyst or someone that works in finance or someone that works in supply chain or manufacturing or some other engineering discipline. So one of the things we've spent a lot of time on is kind of wizard functionality, create, and the data product creator that we're launching. It allows you to go from nothing to a deployed data product in production in 10 minutes or less. And that's that. Obviously you're going to iterate on it, but that concept of a non-technical user or a non-data engineering specialist being able to deploy a data product from zero into production in 10 minutes is game changing. And then the last, sorry,
Yeah.
I was going to say that the last piece, and maybe we come back to it, because we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about it, is where does kind of AI fit into this, and particularly generative AI. And so the most recent iterations for us, the most recent developments have been the functionality we bundle as assist, because at the end of the day, all of those are the pieces, that deployment piece, that development piece, that observability piece, that creation and wizard piece, all of those in their own way can benefit from AI assistance and augmentation. We're not taking the person out the loop, but what we're saying is, if I've got a business requirement and I want to manifest that into some configuration or some SQL or whatever, I could sit for an hour and write that myself, or I could have an AI do 95% of the work for me. And so it's about using AI and generative AI to do the heavy lifting where it makes sense and allow the people to focus on the bits where they're actually bringing their domain knowledge, their expertise, the bits that you can't get anywhere else. So that final assist functionality kind of runs horizontally and applies to all of those other areas.
This is fascinating. There's so many different directions we can go into after this. Your answer, like about roles and AI, but I'm going to take these one by one. So because I'm really curious about some other topics. But if I were to randomly kind of list at a very coarse-grained level, so some of the things you get out of the box are automation across the board, whether it's one button environment deployment. You get orchestration, which is extremely important. You get, of course, CI/CD, but more than that, you get also continuous testing. You get an IDE, so you can with an AI assistant, so you can very quickly do it. So these are, and of course, observability, which is very interesting because I've been covering the space of data observability for quite some time now. And a lesson I learned somewhere in my journey was that observability was not really a standalone category, but was a part of data ops.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. So the burning question I have is that, when we talk to the end users, the consumers, and we say, here are the benefits of a data catalog or data observability, they say, yeah, it all makes great sense in theory, but how do I quantify the benefits?
Mm-hmm.
What are you observing? Like, what are the benefits, quantifiable benefits, if I may, of data ops, and how do you convey that to a company that may be considering putting in data ops?
It's interesting because almost everybody I talk to comes at this from a different direction, and then after 2 or 3 discussions, they all end up with the same light bulb moment. And I would say you can probably put that value and that ROI from a business perspective into 5 buckets. The first one, and probably the most common one that I start talking about, is faster releases. People are saying, I'm releasing once a quarter. I want to be releasing once a day. Or something close to that. How do I move from a very, very manual, very painful, very slow release process to something where I can release and actually almost where the questions of how often I release now isn't a question. That we've got companies who release 20, 30 times a day. Why? Because when an engineer merges a feature, having been peer reviewed and everything else, to the main branch, it simply goes live. There is no maintenance window. There is no once a day, once a week. Features go live when they're ready. That's how web scale companies do it. That's how every large web scale software development companies do it. Is you release when there's something to release, not on any particular cadence.
Yeah, Netflix has literally thousands of microservices being deployed every day.
Now, obviously, the question is, is every data team ready for that? Absolutely not. That's again, that's part of a North Star. But most data teams would be happy to say, okay, well, we can accumulate, 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 changes over a week, and we can release once a week, but in an automated, well-governed way. For most teams, going from quarterly releases to a release a week is game changing. So that release cycle, we've seen customers doing 100x or more improvement in release cycle is really, really important. But in a lot of ways, that underpins an even more fundamental metric, which is faster time to business value. And faster time to business value has a couple of components. First of all, is how quickly can I do the development work? So that requires more efficient development. If it takes me 3 months to build it, doesn't matter how fast I can release it. It's 2 hours on the end of a 3-month development process is still 3 months and 2 hours. So I've got to be able to build it very quickly. But the opposite is true. 2 hours to build something and then waiting 3 months to release it is no good either. So ultimately, to get that real fundamental business, which is faster time to value, is I need to be able to develop faster. So I need much more resource efficiency, which is an important metric. I need the resource efficiency and I need the faster release, and those two come together to time to value.
Okay. So that's number one. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I think the other one, and it's becoming increasingly important as people are under more and more cost pressure, is, and for bigger organizations, efficiency at scale. One of the things that it's a truism across almost any technical organization in any discipline is, it's quite easy to move fast and be efficient with a team of 5 people. 5 people can talk for 5 minutes every morning. They can thrash everything out, and they just move on. It's the 2 pizza box problem. It's really easy to run a team that you can feed with 2 boxes of pizza. The real challenges come from for organizations is what happens when I need multiple teams or need larger teams or multiple teams. How does it scale? And what you find is when you go from 10 engineers to 20 engineers, you don't get double the productivity because efficiency goes down, because there's more requirement for coordination and liaison and things like that. So a big part of what we're doing is trying to break this down in a way that 100 engineers can operate as efficient as efficiently, and therefore with 10 times the productivity as one single team of 10 engineers. How do I get that efficiency at scale? And when we've got customers who are talking about 200 engineers, 300 engineers, 500 engineers, that becomes dramatically important. That when they add another 10, 20, 30 engineers, they need them to be as efficient as the existing teams. And I think the final metric I would look at is really about data quality. And again, it comes back to time to value in many ways you can consider as a wrapper across all of this, because time to value, well, it's not valuable unless people are using it. It's not valuable unless people trust it. So it's, you can have the most efficient development teams in the world. You can have efficiency at scale. You can be releasing fast, but if what you're releasing is junk, you've won the battle but lost the war. So you've absolutely got to consider data quality as a fundamental part of this. Data quality that you can measure, data quality that you can observe, data quality that you can assure and prove to your business.
But how is data ops helping improve data quality? It just somehow seemed orthogonal.
So we did analysis across a set of our customers. We said last year, so 2023, we prevented just over 91,000 production deployments that would have had bad data in. So that's 91,000 versions of a data product, or releases of a data product, that if they had been allowed to go ahead, would have put information in front of the business user that was wrong, was invalid, couldn't be trusted with dented confidence. That's 91,000 times the business has been prevented from seeing bad data and making bad decisions.
How did you do it? What was the trigger that stopped this? How did you?
It all comes down to automated testing. That's the thing that underpins this. Is it in the same way, as you said, you said, Netflix, deploy tens of thousands of times a day. They don't do that based on hope. They don't do that based on, crossing their fingers. They do that because when they've got a release that says, I am ready to go into production, it has passed such an extensive bank of automated tests that they have they have two things. First of all, they have an extremely high degree of confidence that test is going to, that work is going to deploy and be successful and not have any problems. But the other thing they are is realists. And they accept that no matter how good my automated testing is, there will come a time when no test coverage is perfect. There will come a time when something slips through, whether it's a technical problem, it's a requirements problem, whatever, and it gets into production and people start screaming. And the phone starts ringing off and trouble tickets get raised. So in order to achieve that really high data quality, you've got to have two things. First of all, great automated testing, which means that 99.9% of the time, I'm only pushing stuff to production that is good. And a really good automated rollback procedure that says in the 0.1% of the time where my test coverage wasn't perfect or there was something unanticipated, I've got to be able to press a button and roll everything back to the previous good state. And that's one of the biggest not talked about differences between the software and DevOps and historically data is software engineers have had automated rollbacks for years. The reason that a software engineer is happy for their code to go into production automatically is because they know that worst case scenario, it goes wrong, they press a button, everything gets rolled back, they go make yourself a cup of coffee, they get together with a couple of colleagues, they swarm on something and they can solve it in slow time. For data engineers, a bad deployment means everybody gets on the console, frantically writing SQL in production to change things, and it's carnage, it's chaos, it's risky, it's stressful, it's time-consuming, it's bad for the business, and it's terrible governance. Because what you end up with is at the end of it, you end up with a production system that nobody's got any idea what state it's in. People have just randomly made changes until it started working again. How do you move on from that point?
I also like the fact that in software engineering, if there's a new college graduate, a new hire, they can literally instantly they get productive, because if there's something that goes wrong, you can easily roll back and not bring the entire system down. So bringing the data team at that level of maturity is crucial. Thank you for all the work you're doing. By the way, before I want to talk about data products next, but before we pivot to data products, I just want to mention that you wrote a book called DataOps for Dummies.
Yes, we did.
Which is excellent. And then also, now that we're going to talk about data products, Guy, Justin, who I mentioned earlier, and we also co-authored Data Products for Dummies, which we launched last year. Oh, yes, I have my copy here too. Can I see? Yes, there you go. So we wrote this book. It's been very popular. I want to ask you, why are you so upbeat about data products? What are data products?
So I'm upbeat about them because in many ways I would say that data products is not is not something new. I would say what data products is, it's an evolution of what the most forward-thinking people were doing anyway. But at some point we said, we started here and we've been improving to this point. We've been learning from the software world. Where are we heading? And the logical conclusion of where we're heading is that we treat everything as a product. We take all of the lessons from the software world, where everything, whether it's an internal microservice, whether it's a mobile application, whether it's a e-commerce portal, everything is treated as a product. And there are a lot of characteristics about a product that actually doesn't matter whether it's a data product, whether it's a software product, whether it's a digital product. It's much more about the way that you think about it, the way that you manage it, the way that you life cycle it, the way that you prioritize it, and so on. But for me, it brings so much of the value of software into the data world. But the reason that businesses like it, and a lot of reason that companies like it, is because it gives so much transparency. A data product should have a well-defined purpose. It should have a well-defined cost associated with it. It should have a well-defined value. A lot of the problems in the data world was like, the cost is defined as, well, what's the cost? Well, I do 97 things and my entire engineering team has this budget. Well, okay, but how much of that budget is spent on each of those 97 things? Well, I don't really know. It's all thrown into one great big amorphous blob. So we can only talk about things at almost the departmental level. It's very hard to look for efficiencies, look for improvements. Where should I be investing? Where should I be cutting? At a departmental level. It's much, much easier when you can break it down to these much smaller manageable blocks. So the data product becomes the first class citizen, the first class object for management. Everything else I do as part of developing, maintaining, modifying, updating a data product. It becomes that base unit, in the same way that in a lot of ways in the software world, microservices have become. It's not necessarily doing things that didn't exist before microservices, but it's wrapped them up in a very, very well understood, well defined way with some very, very well understood management processes around them.
So is data products something that large companies with very complicated environments and different departments and business units should be doing? Or do you see that it should be more pervasive?
It's universal. We've got companies, one in the spectrum with hundreds of teams, hundreds of engineers, 500 plus data products in production, and we've got companies that have got 3 data products and they're working on their 4th. One of the really nice things about data products is there is very little organizational overhead to it. There's a lot of great concepts out there that say, well, yeah, this is brilliant, but it only makes sense at a certain size. There's an overhead cost, there's an efficiency cost that says, it only makes sense to do it if you've got 50 data products or more or whatever. The actual principles and practices around data products are as valid if you've got 1 or 2 or 3 as if you've got 1 or 2 or 300. So I would say it's absolutely applicable to all ends of the spectrum.
Is there this fear of data products washing, where people are saying, oh, this is a data product, but it fails the litmus test? How would you know that?
There's 2 risks. One is someone just claiming that something that they built 10 years ago, they slap a big stamp saying it's a data product and move on. But there is a risk at the other end of the spectrum, which is being too harsh and saying, well, look, if we define 10 characteristics, we do in the book, we define 10 characteristics of a data product and say, hey, if your data product meets all 10 of these, it's an absolutely first class grade A data product. But if you're only doing 7 of these, that doesn't mean that you're not doing a data product. It doesn't mean you're not doing the right direction. It means that you're probably a little bit earlier in your maturity cycle. It means that you're working towards it. So there is a risk at both ends of the spectrum. There are some pretty fundamental things that I would say, if you're not doing this, then it's very hard to say that you're doing data products in any way. If you, for example, if you're not managing using standard product management principles, then it's very hard to say you've got a data product. If you're not developing and deploying in an automated way, it's very hard to say you've got a data product. If you're not embracing agility, that agile that we talked about at the beginning, it's very hard to say that usefully you've got a data product. But there's some things in there about exclusivity and backwards compatibility that are absolutely critical at the right time. But you don't necessarily have to have those on day one to say, yeah, I've got into building data products. I may just be a little bit earlier in that maturity cycle.
So since you were talking about it, I thought I'll get my book out and just see, you mentioned there are 10 attributes. So I just wanted to, on page 34, if any of you are interested, you can see what are those attributes that must be met before something can truly be called a data product. So that is great. now we've talked about data product. How is DataOps.live? By the way, actually, I was going to ask you about deployment, but I have another burning question about data product. There is a general confusion in the market that data products have been around for a long time because, like Dun and Bradstreet, Factiva, and a bunch of these companies have sold these data products. So there's an idea that, oh, data products is something that you buy, you always monetize it. What are your thoughts about monetization when it comes to a data product?
So yeah, I think in the very early days, the concept of a data product was considered to be something that company A builds, develops in whatever way that means, and sells to company B or individual B, whatever. But yeah, it's something that, it becomes a vehicle to, for exchanging value. I think, first of all, I think the world's moved on from that. I would say 98% of the data products I see are not distributed outside the organization that built them. They are built and maintained by one department and shared and used and consumed by other departments. That's not to say there are definitely exceptions. In fact, we've got organizations and customers where not only are they monetizing their data products, but the data teams are actually a profit center. They are making more money from selling their data than the data teams cost. They're a net contributor to the bottom line, and that's fantastic. If you can do that, that's incredible. And it is amazing when you start thinking about it laterally. One company in particular I'm thinking of, and when I first started talking to them, they were, yeah, our data's not worth anything to anybody. It's very specific to us, and it's amazing how an anonymized version of one company's data suddenly becomes incredibly valuable to a different organization that they never thought about. So there is definitely that external monetization piece, but I would think about monetization in a slightly larger sense. Think about it in terms of value. Whether cash is changing hands or not, to some extent, is irrelevant. But if I'm building a data product and selling it, if it costs me $50,000 a year to build and maintain, and my revenue stream is $25,000 a year, I would say it's probably not worth doing this. I'm losing money. It's a very simple calculation, but it's a valuable calculation. Very few people are doing that with their data today, saying, what is it costing me to maintain this thing? And how, and is it worth doing? That's a critical part of any product thinking is, what's the ROI? What's the delivered value against the cost? And should I be doing it? And you're constantly doing that because it made sense 2 years ago, but it may not make sense today. But so if you think about that internally, yes, okay, money might not change hands, but some reasonable measure of it's costing me X to maintain and it's delivering Y value to my consumers, whether those consumers are physically paying me or not, that's almost irrelevant. But certainly in terms of delivered value, that becomes critically important. As an example, I've got two data products. One's costing me $10,000 a year and one's costing me $50,000 a year. Which one's more important? Well, which one's more valuable? Which one should I be concerned about? Well, the one that's costing me $50,000 a year, supply chain tell me they're using the data coming out of that every hour to optimize their purchasing. They saved $20 million last year on that one. The one that's costing me $10,000 a year, actually, Fred's got a dashboard that he puts up on the wall that he sort of looks at when he thinks about it, but doesn't really do anything with the data. Okay, all of a sudden now, just looking at that element of cost, it looked like I had a $50,000 problem over here. Actually, that $50,000 is the best $50,000 I'm spending anywhere in the business. Whereas that $10,000 over there, that probably is something that I should look critically at. So just looking at cost is a really kind of narrow and I think flawed way of doing things. Cost is one side of the coin, but delivered value is the other side. And only by looking at those two together can you start making meaningful business decisions. So I think about monetization in a much broader sense. It's much more about delivering value. Whether physical cash is changing hands or not is kind of more incidental.
Yeah, this has been such a big challenge. How do you ascribe value to your data outcomes? So I think data products make it easier to do it compared to a very generic data development environment.
Yeah, you've got to, when you ask the question, how much value are you getting from X? First question is you've got to be able to quantify X. What is X? You can't go and say how much value are you getting out of the data warehouse as this big amorphous thing. That's a very hard question. When you can say to someone, hey, my real-time supply chain analytics, how much value are you getting out of that? That's a much easier question to answer. And you're right. It's something we've learned going through this. And it's actually an idea that one of our customers had, which I think is brilliant. They said, look, we go to the business unit and say, or we go to our consumers and say, how much value are you getting out of this? Quantify it. Give me a number in dollars. euros or whatever. Well, I don't really know. Okay, so let me ask a question a different way. How much would you pay me not to turn it off? Now all of a sudden,
Yeah.
well, would you pay me $50,000 to turn it off? Oh, yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, great. Now we've established a minimum. Would you pay me $1 million not to turn it off? Well, no, not really. Okay, well, at least we've got we've got an upper and lower bounds of value, but you can iterate on that a few times, and all of a sudden, rather than trying to ask someone how much value you're getting, ask them how much it would cost them or what they would be prepared to pay for you not to take it away. And actually in theory, it's the same question, but people find that second question much easier to answer, or at least get somewhere reasonably close to a number.
I love this thing. How much will it cost you to turn it on? Since we're talking about cost, what is data? So how much does it cost to use DataOps.live? Like, what's your cost model and how is it deployed?
So, I mean, we deploy our default deployment option is SaaS based. So, all the infrastructure we take care of, and there's agents that live inside your network, and that deals with communication with your data platforms and all your internal systems. One of our we have a lot of customers who are very, very heavy on security, and they require SOC 2 and SOX compliance and various other things. So one of our most fundamental principles is that no matter what the deployment architecture, we never see your credentials, we never see your data. We're providing the management and the control plane, but the movement of data, the movement of metadata, that's not something that we ever have access to. There are customers who have even more stringent requirements where they want effectively a dedicated deployment of DataOps to add in to even add in further managers, and we do that too. In terms of commercially, there's broadly speaking two ways that you can buy it. You buy it per developer seat, which is a simple, straightforward way. I've got 10 people and it's X dollars a month, and that's a simple fixed cost. Or you can consume it, as more and more people tend to want to do these days, on a consumption basis. We say, okay, in the same way, and everybody who's consuming Snowflake is very familiar with this. I buy a number of credits and I burn those credits down, and Snowflake will charge you for time in a compute warehouse, and we will charge you for time as pipelines running. But it amounts to the same thing. It's you buy a bucket of credits and you burn those down, and obviously then you're only using what you're paying for. One of the things that's become incredibly popular in the last year and a half is that our customers can now buy through the AWS Marketplace, the Azure Marketplace, and most recently, the Snowflake Marketplace itself. So if you've got Snowflake credits already committed, you can use those Snowflake credits to buy a subscription to DataOps.live.
You've had a very close relationship with Snowflake from what I've seen lately. Can you talk more about what kind of partnership do you have with Snowflake?
Yes, I mean we work with Snowflake. I mean, we were the professional services company that we worked at originally before we spun out was the first Snowflake partner in Europe. So we have a very, very strong relationship with Snowflake going back to the day of the inception of the company. And in fact, some very senior people at Snowflake kind of advised us on what we should be doing, how we should be setting the company up, and things like that. But yeah, we're a Snowflake Ventures company, so Snowflake invested in us in the very early days. We're a powered by Snowflake company, so we use Snowflake behind the scenes in everything we do. We have Snowflake Tech Ready certification, and as of a month ago, we're now one of, I think, 19 elite partners globally with Snowflake. So a very, very close relationship at a partnering level. But most importantly of all, Snowflake is one of our customers. Snowflake have bet a very important part of their business on DataOps, something called the Snowflake Solution Center, which essentially is every Snowflake sales engineer globally, 750 of them, have access to a library of tens to hundreds of demos, industry solutions that they have to be able to deliver to customers at the drop of a hat. And they're doing tens and tens of these a week. And up to now, it's been a very manual process to set those demos up, to run them, requires an awful lot of configuration work. So Snowflake are now using DataOps.live for that entire organization, to every single demo, every single pre-sales demo, post-sales demo, everything after Snowflake Summit when all the new features come out, or Snow Day. All of those demonstrations given by the field teams are going to be built and deployed as data products through DataOps.live. So we're expecting tens and hundreds of data products deployed tens of thousands of times over the next year.
So it's interesting. So if I were to summarize it, so what you're saying is that Snowflake is a partner, and that you're an elite partner, and you have the tech ready logo. Also, I heard Snowflake is an investor, and
correct,
also a customer.
Absolutely, yeah.
That is great. And they only less than 20 elite partners? What does that give you?
Yeah, I mean, it's really it's the highest level of, I mean, it gives you access inside Snowflake, it gives you credibility inside Snowflake, it gives you something that we've enjoyed for a long time, being kind of that only organization focusing on DataOps for Snowflake. One of the things we do is work very closely with the engineering and product teams at Snowflake to say, when they're trying to make Snowflake more programmable, more automatable, which everybody wants. We work with them because we are driving, and have done since day zero. We're driving, we're the world authorities on kind of how to drive Snowflake programmatically. And I can't remember the numbers; it's probably changed now. But in the early days, I heard a figure that we were, I mean, a really important feature inside Snowflake zero copy clone. I heard a number saying, over half of the zero copy clones done globally across the entire Snowflake customer base were initiated by DataOps.live because we're such a heavy user of that feature, for example.
So one of the things, and this is a bit controversial, but I just want to bring it up because I'm sure a lot of people, when they hear Snowflake, they also hear the costs are going up and Snowflake can get expensive. Is there something that DataOps can help? What are your thoughts on this topic of cost?
I mean, the first thing I would say is I really hate the focus purely on cost. My car is more expensive than my bike, but I don't sell my car and ride my bike everywhere. Why? Because I don't want to get wet and I want to carry shopping and I want to carry my kids and so on and so on. So just saying A is more expensive or than B on its own is irrelevant. It's back to that data product. Is the data product that costs 5 times more worse than the one that costs 10 times? Well, no, because it's delivering a massive amount more value. So I think the just focusing on those infrastructure costs, in some cases they will be lower, in some cases they will be higher. But I think almost asking that question is missing the point. If I need a team that is half the size to operate this infrastructure, then actually the infrastructure costs themselves or the difference in infrastructure costs are probably going to be negligible. If I can deliver business value 3, 4, 5 times faster, a few tens of thousands of dollars here or there on infrastructure costs are irrelevant. So, to me, you've got to look at, yes, cost is a component of it, but what do I get for that cost and what's it delivering to the business? And only by looking at those two together can you make any meaningful analysis. So yeah, I would say, yeah, cost is important, but you've absolutely got to look at what you're getting for that. And Snowflake delivers incredible value in terms of being, cheaper to run, cheaper to administer, needing less teams and so on to run it. But then also, those features like time travel and zero copy clone and, container services and Snowpark and Streamlit, you can do so much, you can deliver so much more value, so much more quickly.
Yeah.
And so much of that is affecting people. Almost universally, salary costs and people are the governing thing in the budgets in any of the teams we're talking about. So, if I can operate my teams even 20% more efficiently because I'm able to operate with DataOps and Snowflake, then the marginal infrastructure difference that costs here, are just get completely lost in the noise.
One of the things that I'm curious about, and we can have so many discussions. I also want to ask you about open source software and your views, but in the interest of time, I want to go, I want to learn what are some of the industry use cases that you see, and are there any ones that have surprised you, like new ones that you initially didn't even think people would use DataOps.live for?
Yeah, I mean, with the number of customers we got now, we got over 1,000 data products, being deployed and updated every day, over 500 within one customer. So the number of use cases is pretty much everything you can think of. I think what has surprised me is the importance and the commonality around governance and the use cases around governance. The number of organizations that come to us and say, actually, we're having a real problem with SOX compliance, for example. And maybe it's not SOX, maybe it's something else, but when you actually come down to it, what they're still saying is, they have very, very significant problems we're using getting consistent development processes, deployment processes, proving that to auditors and things like that. So I think that was something that we really didn't expect quite as much. We obviously expect the business focused use cases in that sense, but then the kind of the governance and compliance focused use cases, we expected them, but I don't think we expected them to have quite the importance and the urgency and the priority that we're currently seeing.
How does DataOps take a part in the SOX compliance space? What is it like? Trying to understand, like, what is
So
that?
I mean, obviously, yeah. I mean, like there's like any of these sort of large, requirements. There's lots of pieces to it, and technology only plays a certain part. But the really big thing for us is twofold. First of all, it's a consistent development process. So it doesn't matter whether I'm developing ingestion code or pipeline code or SQL or transformation code or automated testing code or Streamlit applications or Snowpark applications or native applications or container services. DataOpslive provides a very, very consistent development process, change control process, approval process, peer review process, governance process. So it doesn't matter what you're operating on in that whole ecosystem, you've now got one development process that covers all of the different technical areas, number one. And number two, it works across all your different teams. So you've got, functionally, you've got the same development process. You can then deploy that development process across hundreds of teams and thousands of users. So when your auditor comes to you and says, show me how you're developing and show me how you provide good governance, good change control, you don't have to say, well, team A does these 9 things, team B does these 12 things, team C does these 7 things. You can say teams A through G do things 1 through 12, and they do all of them essentially this way. And there might be a couple of there might be a couple of exceptions to that, but you're talking about something that's standardized for 99% of things with a few easily documented and tracked exceptions, rather than, one theoretical way of doing it and then 190 special cases, which is what, tends to happen when these things evolve organically.
That's amazing to hear how the range of use cases and how DataOps.live is so fungible that you can use it for so many new use cases because of the foundational automation and repeatability, some of these advantages you get just out of the box, and observation. I am curious, looking into the future, I saw last year you got funded, and where are you with your funding? What are the plans for the money that you've raised, and what can we expect in near future?
Yeah, so we raised a fantastic Series A at very challenging times when a lot of companies were struggling to raise money, both with our existing investor Anthos, but also a fantastic new partner Notion. The areas that we're focusing in really are, certainly data products. We've talked about, massive focus on making data products like the first class, core component of everything we do. A lot of that create functionality, so lowering that technical bar, making DataOps applicable and usable by, less and less technical users, making it easier to distribute it into the organization. A big focus on using AI. And I'm always very careful talking about this because, over the years I've been very resistant to jump on bandwagons. I avoided Web 2.0, I avoided blockchain, I avoided Cloud 2.0 and various other things. But generative AI is something we're seeing. There are actual genuine incredible values of this both to our customers. But also when we talk about generative AI in particular, there's 2 elements to this. There's us using it for our users and helping them, but also remember, Jeff Holland just the other day did a fantastic demo, building a new LLM in less than 5 minutes inside Snowflake. So as that becomes more prevalent, our customers are going to want to do that generative AI development, that LLM development themselves. And that's going to go on the list along with SQL and Python and Snowpark and native apps and Streamlit and all these other things. That's going to be another thing that customers are going to want to develop, and they're going to want to have a standardized development process, and they're going to want to be able to test, they're going to be able to validate, they're going to be able to deploy, they're going to be able to roll back, they're going to be able to monitor. So we have a double element for that. It's using it ourselves for our own customers' benefit, but then also allowing customers to build their own generative AI capabilities using really good development practices. So I think, that you wrap those all together, what it comes down to is making DataOps far more accessible, more efficient to a wider number of people, and then providing that unified developer experience across all those different things. But don't forget the infrastructure investment as well. We've got very huge, very important customers. So investing in becoming Snowflake tech ready, investing in getting our SOC 2, type 2 and things like that are also very, very important things that we continually invest in.
That is great. Thank you so much. By the way, we can carry on for a long time. This is literally fascinating, just listening to the vision and how we are making data so much more efficient than we've ever done in the past. But in the interest of time, I have one last question, and this has got nothing to do with technology. If you were not doing data ops, what is your secret passion? What would you be doing?
If I wasn't doing data ops today and I had the choice of anything, I would probably be sitting on a little red vintage tractor somewhere in a small vineyard in Italy, slowly plowing up and down, looking after my vines, and probably making wine as a hobby, I think.
That sounds amazing. Wow. Do you have any particular varietal that you like? Or
I like mid and southern Italian reds, so Primitivo, Aglianico, things like that. But yeah, big full-bodied Italian reds. That's what I'd love. I'd love to go out and grow and make my own wine.
all right. Well, I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but you'll just have to wait. We need to get our data in the right place. If AI is going to be successful, then we need to fix all these fundamental issues. So till then, thank you so much for coming to this podcast. It was such a pleasure. I really enjoyed having this conversation.
Great. Thanks very much, Sanjeev. Pleasure as always. Take care.
Thank you. You too. Bye.